Come with me on a journey that took some 40 years, a journey that was not without its hardships and elements of discontent, as Moses led the Israelites through the wilderness with Hashem orchestrating the venture. We should look at this major redemption of the Jewish people as having three components: the Egyptian component that lasted 210 years, the 40-year wilderness component, and the Promised Land component. Pesach is not just about the Exodus, and it is not just about freedom from slavery. It is much more, as we will learn. While most are very familiar with the Exodus by way of the Pesach Seder, we will be dealing with the wilderness experience to ultimately understand why all this had, and I emphasize had, to take place. These may be some of the questions that might go through your minds as we travel the journey. Did Moses deceive Pharaoh? Did God change Moses' mind? Why not take what seems so obvious, the most direct route to the Promised Land? Did this wilderness journey really go as God had planned? As we approach the end of the journey, the answers will become clear, if not self-evident. We must also remember the adage that sometimes the road to happiness, or your goal, isn't always the most direct route. Now a word about maps. There are many maps, each with having variations with routes, locations, and distances between campsites, as well as time frames and lengths of stays at and between the campsites. There are even variations on the length of the journey, from 38 to 40 years. We are using this map for its clarity and ease to follow. We must keep in mind that the Torah is not a history book on the Jewish people. So our purpose is not to debate historical inaccuracies, be they geographic, physical events, or time frames. Our goal is to understand the purpose and outcome of this venture. We are treating this venture as the birth of a nation and the development of a spiritual relationship between the Israelites and God. The information for this project was gathered from the books of Exodus, Shemot, Numbers, Bamidbar, Deuteronomy, Devarim, and put into an organized timeline to give you a greater feeling of continuity. There are 42 encampments as enumerated in Numbers, Bamidbar 33, verses 1 to 50. We will only dwell on the ones that had significant occurrences. So let's get started. As we look at this first map, we can ask ourselves the first of the most obvious questions. Why didn't the Israelites take the easiest and most direct route to the Promised Land? By biblical estimates, the 150 plus miles could have been covered in about 11 days. One possible answer, on the face of it, is that God didn't want the Israelites to engage the Philistines. As we progress through the journey, you will understand why this direct route could never have happened. We start the journey on the 15th of Nisan in the year 2448, which from our common era year of 2018 means that the journey started 3,330 years ago. Their first stop was recorded to be Sukkot, which means shelters, and from there they left for their second encampment, Etham. Here the Torah first mentions that a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of clouds by day was a demonstration of God's providence in guiding the Israelites. They proceeded to their third encampment called Migdal, which means watchtower. There they camped on the edge of the wilderness and then turned back to Pi Hachiroth, translated as the mouth of freedom or Freedom Bay, before the Egyptian idol Baal Zephon, which was perceived as a lord of the north, and then they camped between Migdal and the sea. This appeared to Pharaoh that the Israelites were wandering aimlessly, and he then realized the Israelites had no intention of returning. Remember, Moses had requested that Pharaoh let the Israelites go so that they can serve God for 3 days. Pharaoh decides to pursue the Israelites. At this point, the Israelites didn't know whether Pharaoh wanted to slay them or have them return to Egypt to serve him. Now the Israelites were locked in with their backs to the sea and the approaching Egyptian army. This is the first recorded time that the Israelites doubted Moses and God and complained, quote, "Were there no graves in Egypt that we should die here in the wilderness?" End of quote. Moses follows God's orders to split the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea. This was on the 7th day after the Exodus, on the 21st of Nisan. The Israelites were reluctant to enter the water, and only did they enter the water after Nachshon, a prince from the tribe of Judah, entered the water, did the sea split. Once on the other side, on the 22nd day of Nisan, Miriam prompted all the women to sing and play their instruments. They spend 3 days traveling to Marah, bitter water, their 5th campsite, where the people again start to complain about the bitterness of the water. So Moses sweetens the water with a branch from a tree. At this point, God tells the people to listen to Moses and believe in him, as well as God. Otherwise, he will inflict diseases on them like he did to the Egyptians. They stayed at Marah for 6 days and then went on to their 6th campsite, Elim. This was described as a good place, for it contained 12 springs and 70 palm trees. Note the significance of the 12, referring to the 12 tribes, and the 70, referring to the 70 judges of the Sanhedrin. At Elim, they stayed 10 days. After Elim, they camped by the Sea of Reeds on the east side in an area known as the Wilderness of Zin. On the 13th of Iyar, they moved on to a campsite called Dafka, where they stayed 2 days before moving on to Alush, their 9th campsite, arriving on the 15th of Iyar. At this point in time, they are 1 month into the Exodus. The Israelites have exhausted all their food and, of course, again, start complaining. This is where God rains down manna to feed the people with explicit instructions on how to gather and to use it. God becomes very disappointed as some do not follow his instructions. At Alush, they stayed 8 days before moving on to their 10th campsite called Refidem. A Mechilta postulated that Refidem is a contraction which means Rafu Yadayim Min HaTorah. They loosened their grip on the Torah. After all that God had done for them, they still questioned his presence among them. At Refidem, there was no water, so Moses strikes the rock as God had commanded him. This is also the place where Amalek, Esau's grandson, attacks the Israelites from behind. During the battle, Moses raises his arms, and that allows the Israelites to defeat the Amalekites. Their next stop, Mount Sinai, is a 1 day's travel of 10 miles to the southeast, arriving there on the 1st of Sivan. At Mount Sinai, many things occurred. Moses ascends and descends the mountain 3 times, breaks the tablets on his second descent when he sees that the Israelites had created a golden calf as a substitute for Moses' leadership. The Israelites thinking that since he was on the mountain 40 days that he was dead. Moses descends on the third tribe with the tablets containing the 10 Commandments on the 10th of Tishrei, which is Yom Kippur Day. Another important occurrence was that the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was constructed. This is significant because this is the first time that God had commanded the Israelites to do something for themselves. After the Mishkan was constructed, the Israelites were guided by the cloud of glory that hung over the Mishkan by day and the pillar of fire by night. After the Mishkan was constructed, the Israelites were guided in their movement and length of stay at any particular campsite by the cloud of glory that hung over the Mishkan by day and the pillar of fire by night. On the 1st of Nisan, about to complete their first year in the wilderness, God tells Moses to tell the people to prepare for the Passover sacrifice on the afternoon of the 14th and to follow all the laws of the festival. This, however, was their only paschal sacrifice until they had reached the promised land. For those who were defiled or unclean at the time of the first paschal lamb sacrifice, they would have an opportunity to do it 1 month later, thus the establishment of Pesach Sheni, the second Pesach. Their stay at Mount Sinai lasted about 11.5 months. From there they moved on to Kibor Hattawa, their 12th campsite. Here they now reassembled the Mishkan for the first time, having disassembled it before leaving Mount Sinai. And again the masses start complaining that they were fed up with the manna and they wanted meat. Moses complains to God that he can't handle this anymore, and God tells him to assemble 70 elders, and they will help him with the people. Then God sends down masses of quail to feed the people. The people gather excessive amounts and gorge themselves. They suffer the consequences and many die. Hence, this campsite is known as the Graves of the Craving. Here they stayed for 1 month and then moved on to their 13th campsite, Hatzorot. Hatzorot is about 37 miles from Mount Sinai, and they arrived there on the 22nd of Sivan, 2449. Here Miriam questions why God is not treating her and Aaron like Moses, in that God told Moses to separate from Zipporah, his wife, whereas Miriam and Aaron didn't have to. In addition, God tells them when he wants to speak to them, he will do so in a vision, but to Moses, and only Moses, will he continue to speak directly. For questioning God and for doing Lashon Hora about Moses, Miriam is afflicted with tzoras and is quarantined outside the camp for 7 days. Moses reminds the people God will do to them what he did to Miriam if they don't obey. When Miriam is welcomed back into the camp, the Israelites move on to their 14th site, Rhythma. Rhythma translated as slander. One day after they arrive, Moses tells the people to prepare to enter the Holy Land. This is about 13 months after they left Egypt. The people are not comfortable with entering a land they know nothing about, so they ask Moses to send spies to check it out. Moses didn't feel it was necessary because he had full faith in God, but he did acquiesce to the people's demands. He appointed 1 man from each of the 12 tribes. The spies returned on the 8th of Av, but the impact on what they reported affect the Israelites on the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, not a good day for the Jewish people. This is when intense grieving took place, with 10 of the spies reporting with great negativity. The land was good, but the people there were giants, too strong, and no way could they be defeated or conquered. Only Joshua and Caleb reported differently. Remember, Moses had requested them to find out about the quality of the land and how the land could be conquered, not if the land could be conquered. This showed, one more time, their lack of faith in God. Fearing they would have to confront these people, they started talking about selecting a new leader who would lead them back to Egypt. God was very angry at this point and wanted to destroy the whole Jewish people. Moses pleaded with God to save them, so that they could fulfill his promise that they would enter the promised land. God compromises. All those over 20 years of age at the time of the Exodus would perish before entering the promised land, except for Caleb, Joshua, women, Kohanim, Levites, and the mixed multitude, those non-Jews who traveled with the Israelites. In essence, this turned into a 40-year death march. The irony is that the distance between Rhythma and the Promised Land was an estimated 11-day journey. As punishment for questioning God and Moses, the Israelites would not enter the Promised Land for 39 years. Another salient event that took place at Rhythma was Korach's rebellion. With much discontent present amongst the multitude, Korach decided to challenge Moses' authority. With 250 men of renown and leaders from various tribes, they tried to depose Moses. Korach wanted to redefine the status of the high priest as being different from the rest of the people, but not holier. He felt all men are holy, and not one should set themselves above another. Korach posed as a champion of the people and tried to even discredit Moses. God would have none of this, and he kills Korach and his 250 followers by having the earth open and swallowing them up. The rest of those who sided with Korach, some 14,700, died of a plague. Between Hatzerot and Kaddish Barnia, there are 18 campsites. It took them about 22 years to travel through them, with an estimated time of about a year and a half for each encampment. We already talked about Rhythma, and we will only mention two others on the list. Epstein Kibor is shown on some maps as being stopped at twice, once on the way heading up to Kaddish Barnia, and in some maps being stopped on the way down from Kaddish Barnia. This map demonstrates the somewhat circuitous route between Hatzorot and Kaddish Barnia. Next, let's consider the 25th campsite, named Hashmona. As we recall, the Maccabeans were a part of the Hashmonean dynasty, and hence their association with Hanukkah. Yechanu in Hebrew is translated as they camped. The Kuf and the Hey equals 25. Combined, the word is Hanukkah, or they camped at the 25th site. We may ponder if this was a prediction ordained by God as encoded in the Torah, as a place and time rather than a physical place. May I remind you that Hanukkah happened in the year 3600, which was 1150 years after their journey experience. Kaddish Barnia was the next and last major encampment. Their arrival was in Nisan between the years 2468 and 2471, and they left in the month of Nisan, 2487. Their length of stay at Kaddish Barnia is estimated to be between 16 to 19 years, depending on the source used. To summarize what happened at Kaddish Barnia, it took approximately 22 to 23 years to get there. This was their longest stay at a campsite, approximately 19 years. And it was their last major stop before entering the Promised Land. Here Moses strikes the rock twice to get water from it. God had ordered him to talk to the rock and subsequently punished him for disobeying. This is where Miriam dies on the 10th of Nisan in the year 2487, in the 39th year of the journey. Mount Hor, or Seir, is the 33rd encampment on the edge of Edom. The Edomites are the children of Esau, and are not nice to the Israelites, refusing them entry and passage to Canaan, so they had to go around Edom. Aaron dies on the 1st of Av, 2488, the 40th year of the journey. He is 123 years old and is mourned for 30 days. The Amalekites attacked the Israelites a second time. They felt that they had the advantage this time since the clouds of glory had disappeared. However, they did take added assurances since they knew the Israelites had the power of prayer, so they disguised themselves as Canaanites, but they were still defeated by the Israelites. At the 34th campsite, Zalman, the Israelites, disheartened by Aaron's death and discouraged because of the Amalekites' attack, started to show their discontent, and some actually decided to head back to Egypt. Punan, the 35th campsite, is where God tested his people again, because God felt slandered by the people by questioning and losing faith in Moses and him. He sends venomous snakes and animals to cause death among the people, then instructs Moses to make a copper image of a snake and mount it on a pole. Those who gaze on it will live, as this will be a sign of repentance, and they will give their hearts to God. Those familiar with emblems will recognize this as a universal sign of the medical caduceus. On the eastern border of Moab, 30 miles south of the Dead Sea, is the 36th campsite of Oboth. Here God tells the Israelites not to enter the land of Moab because he didn't want them to fight the Moabites. One powerful theme throughout the journey is God's desire to steer the Israelites away from confrontation, to avoid wars and battles until the very end upon entering the Promised Land. The 37th campsite was on the eastern border of Moab, called Iye Havarim. Givon Gad, the 38th campsite on the east side of the Dead Sea, was where the last generation of Israelites died. That was on the 15th of Av, 2488. Some commentaries say that no one died in the last year, but it was the 15th of Av that they realized the decree was over. This was 15 days after Aaron's death. At Almon Divlathaim, the 39th site, just east of the Amorite border, the Israelites asked for safe passage, but were denied. A bloody battle took place with Sihon, the king of the Amorites, and Og, the king of Bashan. They were defeated, and the Israelites took possession of a lot of land. This is where Sihon brings in Balaam, the non-Jewish soothsayer, dream interpreter turned prophet, was brought in to put a hex on the Israelites. It didn't work. Campsite number 40 was at the mountains of Avarim in front of Mount Nebo. The 41st campsite was on the plains of Moab, on the east side of the Jordan River. Here Moses began his farewell address. Moses dies on Mount Nebo, at the northeast point of the Dead Sea, the same day that he was born, the 7th of Adar, 120 years earlier. Note that Miriam, Aaron, and Moses all died within 11 months of each other. The final campsite was when they entered the land of Canaan, the Promised Land, 30 days after the mourning period for Moses. Once inside the Promised Land, they had to drive out the inhabitants, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Amorites, the Jebusites, and the Agites, to name a few. It was imperative that they drive out these idol worshippers and destroy their temples to make Israel a holy land. This all begs the question, why did it take 40 years? Some say the Israelites may have perpetuated the long journey themselves by their actions. They certainly tested God and Moses multiple times with their doubt and not having unswerving faith in them. The book of Numbers recounts that the people tested God 10 times. When the Egyptians chased them to the sea, when they had nothing to drink at Marah, when they ran out of food, when they disobeyed God and collected too much manna, when they collected manna on the Shabbat, when they ran out of water at Refidem, when they worshipped the golden calf, when they rebelled against God's mitzvot, when they complained they had no meat, when they believed the evil spy's report. Those 40 years were very difficult for Moses. He was constantly being tested and challenged, but he remained devoted in his service to God. The purpose of the journey was twofold. One, to transform the Israelites from Bnei Yisrael to Am Yisrael, from the children of Israel to the nation of Israel, a transformation that was not so easy. The saying is that you can take the slave out of slavery, but it is a lot harder to take slavery out of the slave. And number two, to create a spiritual relationship with God. God's plan was to mold the nation of Israel into a society that was the complete antithesis of Egypt. And I have to emphasize and stress complete antithesis. And to do this, the Israelites had to go through the Egyptian experience to appreciate what they were going to get and become. To clarify, let's contrast Egyptian society with what God's ultimate goal was for the Israelites. Egyptian society worshipped idols and multiple gods. Judaism believed in one God, monotheism. Egyptian culture idolized death. Judaism is focused on life. Egyptians put their sovereignty in Pharaoh, who was considered a god king. The Jews put their sovereignty in God. Pharaoh ruled by might. Judaism rules by right, based on laws. Pharaoh was a priest and a godlike character. Jewish kings had no major religious role. The Egyptians built memorials and monuments for their dead. For the Jews, their words are their memorials. The Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife. Judaism is concerned with improving the world. For the Egyptians, rest was abhorrent. Judaism sanctified time and compelled the day of rest. Egyptian slaves had no rights. In Judaism, slaves are treated with respect and have rights. Pharaoh did not safeguard liberty and private property. Judaism secured the right of individuals to private property. Pharaoh did not need the consent of the people to govern over. The Israelites gave consent to God to be governed. In Egypt, one man ruled a nation at his whim and caprice. Judaism stresses that the nation rules itself under the laws of God as set down in the Torah. Needless to say, This experience taught the Israelites humility, gratitude, and reverence for God, and prepared them as a nation for their mission. For Israel to deserve that independence, they had to understand that their nationhood existed for a calling much greater than mere national independence. Israel, the nation, existed for one purpose: the fulfillment of the covenant, the Brit, that was given to them at Sinai, not the other way around. And by following that covenant, they would fulfill that mission of being a light unto the nations.